Okay, so in our last session we continued our discussion on routing. So we have taken a look at quite a bit of new things yesterday. So we have seen how to define module-wide routing. Okay, how to define child routes. Okay, and then we have seen how we can apply router outlet, how we can use router outlet to render views and subviews. So in our today's session, we'll continue our discussion on routes. So just a couple of topics left on routes, and then we will move on to forms. Okay. So we have optional parameters and router guards. So after that, we can talk about forms. Okay. Let's take a look at optional parameters. So we have already seen route parameters. So route parameters are the ones that we define inside our app routing file. So let's go to the app routing file. Okay, so this is basically is a route parameter. You define the path, the name of the path followed by a route parameter. So likewise, we can have any number of route parameters you want in your application. Okay, and I have also showed you how to access the route parameters inside the component. You go to your page 4 component. You can see we have we inject your activated route inside your constructor, and then from there we can actually access it either using a param map or we can subscribe to it. So that way we can listen to the route change. We can listen to the route parameter changes. Okay, so the same way your optional parameters are the parameters that we can add to your URL, but they don't have to be defined inside your routing file. So these optional parameters could be anything. It could be, for example, let me show you an example. So let's say here in one of the component I just added an optional parameter. So in the optional parameter, the optional parameters, they are also called as query parameters. A query parameters is nothing but a parameter which has a key and a value. Okay, so you must have seen the URLs like for example something like http localhost 8080 slash something like myapp colon some page question mark like id equal to 1 and page number equal to 20, something like this. So these are your optional parameters. Okay, optional parameters are also called as query parameters. Your query parameter basically have your parameter name and it's a key value pair. This key is going to be the ID, the parameter name, and the value is going to be the whatever the value that you wanted to add to the parameter. So here this is a key and this is the value. So if you wanted to add your optional query parameters to your URLs, you don't have to change anything in your routing file. So you just have to add. So wherever that link is being generated, for example, when I click on this link, my URL changes to page 2. So here, this is how you add your query parameters to your page 2. Okay, use a property binding notation, and then you define your query parameters equal to, and if you see this is an object, so this object can have key value pairs. Here id equal to 1, you can put something else. If I want something like name equal to API. Okay, when you click on this link, what will happen is the URL is going to have your page 2 question mark id equal to 1 ampersand name equal to API. Okay, so likewise you can add any number of query parameters you want for your URLs. Okay, the important thing is you don't have to change your routing file to add your query parameters. Okay, these are your optional parameters. Your routes can exist without query parameters as well. Okay, those are optional. Okay, and then here once you have your query parameters added to your router link, then what you can do is you can basically go to that component and you can access them. Okay, you go to your page 2 component. The same way you access your route parameters, so you can also access your query parameters. You inject your activated route. Your activated route has your .query params object, and then you can subscribe to it. You subscribe basically it basically gives you your params object, and from there you can access your params of id. Here I consoling out params.id. Same way you can console out console.log params of name. Okay, this is how you access those parameters inside your components from your activated routes object. Activated route dot query params dot subscribe. If you see, a query params actually returns something called an observable. Okay, your observable basically have a subscribe method. So when you have an observable, you can always subscribe to it. Okay, so whenever there is a change to your query parameters, your subscription, these params will automatically get updated with the latest values. If you see, this looks very similar to the route parameters that we did. Route parameters dot subscribe. The same way we have query parameters dot subscribe. Okay, from here inside that, if you see, this is actually is your anonymous function. You can write function of params, that you can always do that, but you can use your arrow function. Params console.log params of id and name. Okay, let's take a look at that. Go to page 1 component and you can click on your page 2. So let's load our app. Okay, already did that. Let's go to 4200. Here is your page 1. Go to your page 1. If you see, now you are inside your page 1. This is your link. If you see, when I hover on that link, it shows you the URL right below here, right? If you see the URL, you have id equal to 1 and ampersand name equal to API. I don't know, you cannot see that well. When you click on this link, if you see, you have id equal to 1, ampersand name equal to API. If you see, those values are printed out. Okay, so that's how you can add any optional parameters that you want to add to your URL, and this is how you can access them. Okay, so not only like this, if you want, you can. So if you remember, we can. So this is through an anchor, right? So when we do programmatic navigation, we can also set your query parameters. I think I do have an example somewhere here. Let me show you. Here it is. If you see, I have your router.navigate method that takes the first parameter is the route that you want the user to go to, and if you see, the second parameter is your query params. Query params is your object. Query params id equal to 1, comma name equal to API. Okay, this is how if you wanted to do a programmatic navigation and then add your query parameters to your link, so that's how you do it. Okay, so the second thing we have, so we have query params, and then we also have something called route fragments. Route fragments, basically it starts with your hash keyword. So let me show you an example. So where is that? Yeah, it's in page 2. So we have this page 2 component. So what I did was I added your fragment. So here, if you see inside that object that I showed you earlier, you can add your query params. You can also add your fragments. Your fragments are nothing but let me show you. If I click on that link, you can see that they basically starts with a hash keyword. Let's say go back to, so what is that? Let's say link, navigate to page 1. Page 1. That's a button. Let's click on that button. Page 1. If you see your hash help, your fragments start with a hash and your fragment key. If you remember, when we talked about our CSS, I guess, or HTML, then we talked about your anchor. So where we have used this hash to go to a particular section of a page. Okay, the same way. Do you guys remember that? The same way. This is the same thing. So if you wanted to have hash help, it will go to your this hash help will refer to some section in this page. If you see, that refers to your help section. Okay, if you have a large page where instead of scrolling it down, so when you go to this particular URL, it will directly take you to that section of the page. Okay, if you want to do some that functionality inside your Angular application, if you wanted to add some fragments, you can do that by adding your fragments like this. Either you can use your router.navigate, you can add your fragment like this, or you can add your fragments to your link itself. Let me show you. I think it should be somewhere here. Here it is. Fragment equal to education. So you have your router link, fragment equal to education. The same way I added query parameters, you can also add your fragments to your URLs. Okay, so that's your optional parameters, which is your route, which is your query parameters and your fragments. Okay, the next one is your router guards. So your router guards are a little important topic. So the reason, because you'll probably have to use them pretty often. So you must have seen this in your when you're filling out a form. If you click on some other link, you basically get a pop-up saying like, okay, do you really want to leave this page, or do you want me to discard the changes? So you can achieve that functionalities inside your using your router guards. So your router guard is nothing but like a guard inside, like if you have an ATM, you have a guard outside, right? So let's say like that guard, if he wanted to let you inside the ATM, let's say he wanted to check something, okay, he's gonna check something and then let you inside the ATM. Okay, so let's say we have the guard. Once you come out of the guard, come out of your ATM. So let's say the guard also have to check something else. Okay, so he's basically checking whether you can enter into the ATM, whether you can leave from the ATM. Okay, so that's what is like a guard, right? That's an ATM guard. So likewise, we also have router guards. A guard here, what it does is it basically guards a user from, if you want to check, let's say I'm on page 1, I wanted to go to page 2. Okay, a user trying to go from page 1 to page 2. I wanted to check if user has access to go to page 2. Okay, I can do that by using a guard. Okay, and let's say I have a form. I filled out a form, and then I'm trying to navigate to a different page. So definitely user will lose information user has entered. So you're gonna ask user, okay, do you really want to leave this page? Because this will discard all the things that you have made to this page. You can do that inside using your guards. Okay, so there are two guard states that you need to understand for your components. One is your activate and deactivate. Okay, deactivate is when the user moving from one page to one component to another component. That means your previous component will get deactivated. Okay, whereas an activate state is when a new component gets activated. That's your activate state. So let's say I'm moving from page 1 to page 2. Okay, when I click on a link, okay, go to page 2. So that means my page 1 component will get deactivated and my page 2 component will get activated. Okay, so these are the two states that you can actually capture. Okay, or you can write some code with these two states, for these two states, and you can do something. Okay, okay, let me show you some examples here. So here I created a guards folder. I didn't use any commands to do it. I just created a folder and I created two TypeScript files, authorization guard and leaving guard. Okay, my authorization guard, what it basically does is it basically checks if user has access to a component. Okay, if before that component gets activated, I wanted to check if user has access to that component itself. Okay, here I'm not doing anything. So here I'm just asking like, okay, do you really want to visit this page? So in order to write this guard, what I did was I basically I created a class and implemented my CanActivate interface. Your CanActivate interface is defined inside your Angular router package. Okay, I imported that and I implemented the CanActivate. So since it's an interface, I need to override the methods that I have. So which is your CanActivate method, which returns a Boolean value. Here I'm just returning, okay, confirm, do you really want to visit this page? So user is going to get a box where they'll have OK and cancel. When the user clicks OK, I really want to visit this page, you can go to that page. If you click on cancel, the user will stay on the same page. Okay, so this is your CanActivate guard. This is your leaving guard. Your leaving guard basically is checking, okay, do you really want to leave this page? Okay, these are just for demo purposes, but in real world we generally don't do. We have a use case to do it, like for example forms where user is moving away. Okay, will lose changes? Okay, do you really want to leave? But here, since we haven't talked about forms, I'm just showing you a little bit of how we can do this. So in order to implement, if you see, there is a small difference between your activate and your deactivate interfaces. So when you define your CanActivate is not a generic component. So whereas your CanDeactivate method, CanDeactivate interface is a generic component. So here I wanted to apply my CanDeactivate to my page 1 component. Okay, so since this is an interface, we need to override a method called CanDeactivate, so that returns a Boolean. So it's going to ask me, okay, do you really want to leave this page? Okay, now once you have defined these two guards with your activate and your deactivate, you need to configure which components. So let's say I define my activate guard. I need to let my Angular router know, okay, which component this activate guard should be active for. Okay, then you go to your routing file and you activate it. So this is how you do it. So you say path page 1. So this is how our earlier routing was. Configuration was for your page 1. You say page 1. Component is page 1 component. Okay, you have your another parameter that you can pass to this object, which is your can deactivate, and you can pass, okay, what is a guard that you wanted to apply. So here I'm going to just comment this out, and I'm going to enable these two. Okay, I have can deactivate enabled for my page 1 component and can activate enabled for my page 2 component. Okay, I need to comment out this guy as well. Okay, that's how you hook up your components to your guards. Okay, in your routing configuration file. Okay, let's take a look. Let's demo this and see what happens. Okay, let's go here. 4200. Okay, I'm inside. I'm going to click on page 1. I'm inside my page 1. So let's say I wanted to go to page 2. Okay, so it's asking me, okay, do you really want to leave this page 1? Okay, I'm going to say no, I don't want to leave. I click on cancel. I stay on my page 1. I don't move. Okay, I click on that and I say like, okay, do you really want to leave this page 1? Yeah, I want to. I'm going to say okay. If you see, I got another one. It's asking me, do you really want to visit this page, which is your page 2? I click on cancel. I stay on the page 1 itself. Okay, I click on page 2. Okay, I really want to leave this page 1. Okay. Okay, do you really want to visit this page? Yeah, I want to. And I'm going to click on OK. If you see, I move to page 2. Okay, so when you are moving from one page to other page, you wanted to do something. You wanted to check, okay, if user has access to that page. Okay, or if you want to prevent user, if you're just asking user, okay, do you really want to leave this page? You have some form data that you will lose. In order to, like, in order to ask user a question, you can basically use these your router guards to do it. Some other page, it basically prompts you for, okay, do you really want to, like, leave this page? So you do the same thing in your applications using your router guards. Okay, the important ones are you can activate and you can deactivate. You write your guard class, guard TypeScript file, and implement those interfaces and hook up to whatever the components they are applicable for using your can activate and you can deactivate. You see, this is an array, so that means you can have multiple guards. I can have a leaving guard, I can have something else. Okay, that's your guards. So that summarizes our routing in your Angular applications. Okay, now let's talk about one small thing that I forgot. So once you have your guards defined, the guard TypeScript files, you need to register them inside your module. You go to your module and you define them inside your provider section. Providers, authorization guard, and leaving guard. Okay, that's one other small thing that I forgot. So we'll do a live guard when we create our course form. Once we covered forms, and I'll show you how to use that for our course page, course form component, and your other form component. Alrighty, that looks good. So now let's talk about forms. Alrighty, let's create a forms demo project. Ng new forms demo. So in your Angular application, there are two types of forms that we have. One is your template driven forms. The second one is your data driven forms or your reactive forms. Data driven forms, these are also called as your reactive forms. Okay, you have your template driven forms and then you have your reactive forms. Okay, the difference between both of these type of forms, your reactive forms or your data driven forms gives more control for the developer to define forms, to customize your forms. It will give you more control. So whereas your template driven forms, your Angular does a lot of job for us, but if you wanted to even customize more, then you go for your data driven forms. Okay, so I'll have that. Let's have that application. It's installing your packages. So we'll cover our template driven forms today, and then we'll take a look at data driven forms tomorrow. Okay, after that we have like two, 3 or 4 small topics left. Yeah, we need to take a look at HTTP and then some best practices in Angular. And I'll show you some introduction to Angular testing as well. So that summarizes our application, our Angular discussion. These optional parameters and fragments, you may not use it, but if you have to use it, this is how you can use it. So wherever you have a router link, you would use the property binding and add your query parameters. The same way your fragments. So were you guys able to do that course app for your other component and your the same way I did course component, I asked you to do the other component. So if you guys haven't done it, I mean it's a time to do it, because we'll be adding forms to those. Once we are done with your forms concept, then we'll add our course form component, and then you have your other form component where we can fill in some details about our course and your author. Alrighty, so it's created. So let's cd to that forms demo. Let's start it. So let's open forms demo folder. So before working on forms, the first step that you need to do is you need to basically go to your app module, or wherever the module, whichever the module that you wanted to use forms. You need to add a couple of things. One is say import. So you need to add forms module, and then react to forms module from Angular forms, Angular/forms. Okay, forms module and react to forms module. Obviously, you need to add this to your import section so that our app module can see those components and classes or interfaces defined inside these. Let's import them. Forms module and react to forms module. Nice. Okay, for this application, so let's still building it. We'll also add Bootstrap so that we can also cover how to create forms using Bootstrap. Alrighty, let's start coding our form first and then we can add it. Well, let's create a component, view integrated terminal. Let's create a small component, ng generate component. The name of the component that I wanted to create is registration form. Registration form component. I don't want to create a folder. I don't want inline style, but I don't want an inline template, and I don't want a test file. Spec equal to false. What? Oh, I have a typo there. Oh, okay, no worries. We can delete it. Okay. Let's see the files generated. Let's delete the spec file. Okay, we have your form component and you have your component HTML. So the reason I want a separate file because we have our code would be a little more. let's delete that. So the first step is you take any form that you wanted to create, right? So regular forms, that the HTML forms that we have talked about earlier. We have your form. So inside this, I'm going to do the forms in Bootstrap way. So the way you can define a Bootstrap input inside a form. So you basically do a div. You create a class called form group. Inside this div, you're going to have a label. I'm going to have for username. That's your for property of your label. And at the same level, I'm going to have an input with the class form control. Okay, and then I'm going to have a name property, name equal to username. I think that looks good. Alrighty, let's break this down into multiple lines. Have your label there, have your input there, and then you have your closing there. You see, that's your Zen coding that I showed you earlier. Here I'm going to create a username. Okay, that's my username. I'm going to do the same thing. Div dot form group. So this form group, your form control, these are your Bootstrap classes. So that will give a very good look and feel when you are using Bootstrap. Form group. Okay, I need a label. I need the attribute to be for, let's put something, city. At the same level, I want an input with the class form control. Then it should basically have an attribute set, which is your name, which is your city. Okay, that looks pretty good. So I have my form created. City is the label of my form. Wonderful. Okay, let's create a button. I'll add properties as we go along. Let's say button. Yeah, we can even do button. I want the style to be BTN primary. BTN primary. I should create a button. Type equal to submit. Because if you see, it's not type equal to button, it's type equal to submit because we need a form submission. Correct? We can even do input type equal to submit if you want. And then here I'm going to have the label as submit. If you see, it's a regular form, so there is nothing magic there, just a pure HTML, correct? Okay, let's see where this is. I don't know what it is doing. 92% chunk asset optimization. It's taking a lot of time. Okay, I think that worked. Let's terminate this. Let's install Bootstrap. How we do it? We say npm install Bootstrap. Bootstrap -s. So that should install Bootstrap in our application. What? How it is? What? Yeah, it's just I mean, if you open this HTML file in your browser, it will not find those styles. Okay, the form will display without the styles being applied. Okay, because these forms will come from your Bootstrap CSS. So we need to install Bootstrap, then include Bootstrap CSS, then your form will look a little better. Then the styles will get applied. Okay, it's installed now. Let's go to our styles.css and import it. Say at import. So find Bootstrap folder, bootstrap folder, have your find the dist folder. Inside that you'll find a CSS folder, and then you'll find Bootstrap CSS. Let's put a semicolon towards the end. That should take care of it. Okay, our Bootstrap should be imported. When we do ng-serve again, okay, let's do a little bit more. I'll show you how we do it. So this is your plain form that gets created, right? So there is no Angular stuff. This is just a HTML form that's bound to your component registration form component.html. Alrighty, so let's serve it and then see how it looks. That looks good. Okay, so we have defined our component. Let's go to your app component HTML. Let's get rid of, clean up some of these stuff that we don't want. We don't need that. We don't need this image. Welcome is fine. So we'll add one more style to our div here in your app component. So we're going to add class container default. So this is a container style for your this is a Bootstrap container style, so it will basically center align everything. It looks much better. Okay, here welcome is fine. So let's add that component that we have, which is your registration form component. It's app-registration form. Let's copy this guy and put it inside your app component HTML. Done. App registration form is available now. Alrighty, let's take a look at our 4200 page. Okay, so if you see, it looks very good, correct? Say welcome to app, username and city. You see this blue button here, the styles, these are your bootstrap styles. Okay, now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to add some Angular stuff in here. Okay, in your template driven forms, what we do is, so this is our registration form component .ts. So here inside your HTML, so I'm going to add some more code in here. I'm going to write hash f equal to ng form. This f variable can be anything. It could be r form. It could be anything. The template variable name can be anything, but it has to be set to your ng form. Okay, I'll show you why we do that. And then, so wherever you have your input here, right? So you need to add something called ng modal. ng modal. Okay, that's pretty much it. So wherever you have inputs, you add your ng modal and then your hash f equal to r form. Now here, so once this form is submitted, we need to do something, correct? So that action, we need to do it, define inside your component. So write ng submit. This is submit button. Once the submit form is submitted, I wanted to run handle form submit. Here I'm going to pass that r form that I have, r form. I'm going to pass this form, r form variable that I have, to my handle form submit inside my registration form component.ts. Here I'm going to write handle form submit. And then here I'm going to capture it. I'm going to get my r form. You see it's of type ng form. But we don't have, your component does not know what ng form is. Let's import it. Import ng form from Angular Forms. Angular Forms. Okay, let's console the form out so that we know what is inside the form. I say console.log of our form. Okay, console.log of our form. Okay, let's run that. Alrighty, let's refresh our page. Okay, let's enter something. Say p.bh gmail.com, cities Argyle. Okay, let's click on submit. If you see, I got the ngForm object here. If you open this ngForm object, you will find there is something called value here. You see value. These are your form properties. Whatever you are seeing here, these are all your form properties. Okay, your value property is going to have the values that user entered. If you see, the value is an object. It has a key value pair. It's an object because it has set of members and its values. The state of the object, which is your city is Argyle, username is appy.bh@gmail.com. If you see this is of type ng form, your ng form basically has something called your control and controls. Let's open your controls and see what it is. Okay, if you see, your controls is an object. It has two controls. One is your city, the second one is your username. If you see, based upon whatever we did on our HTML page, your Angular created an ng form object, and then it created a controls object, and it contains your controls, city and your username. In your data driven forms, you create those. In your template driven forms, you set up something, your Angular creates your controls automatically. Okay, city and username. If you see, your form basically have a set of states. Your form has a pending state. It has a pristine state. So pristine means the form has, if it's changed or not. You have your form basically right now it does not have any data, but when you preload a form with certain data, when you change something in there, your pristine will be false because your data is changed. Okay, that's your pristine. It tells user that whether the data has been changed or not. Okay, and then you have your touched and untouched. Your touched is very similar to pristine. Your touched basically tells a particular when something has been touched in the sense like whether user tried to do something in that field. Your untouched basically, if it's false, that means user hasn't touched anything. Okay, and you have your valid property. So all of these are Boolean properties. You can see true or false values here. If you see, you have your untouched, touched, submitted. You see, all of these are Boolean properties. So based upon your user action, some of these properties would be set. So these properties not only exist for your form, it also exists for your controls. If you open your controls, here if you see, you'll see those values as well here. If you see pristine, okay, you have your enabled, disabled, touched, untouched, valid, invalid, and so on. Okay, so based upon your Boolean properties, you can figure out, okay, what is the state of your control. Okay, now let's go ahead and just print out the value of it, ng form, because we are interested in the only the value right now. We say rform.value. Alright, you enter something, you click on. If you see, that's just the object which contains your two properties, city and username, with the values that you have entered in these components. Okay, now we are able to enter the data inside a form, and we are able to access the data inside the component, and we can just pass this data to a service, and the service can send this data to your server to persist it inside your database. Okay, very simple. Now what we're gonna do is, so let's say I have a user object here. Your user is an object. It contains username, and then I have a city. Okay, let's say these are basically, right now those are empty, but you wanted to, let's say if these has values. Okay, forget about it. Let's bind this user object to your form. Let's see how we do that. You go to your app component HTML, which is your registration component HTML, and then here, so if you see, we have defined your ng modal here, correct? So we're going to change that to your property binding. ng model equal to user dot username. ng model equal to user dot city. Okay, so now what we are trying to do is a one-way binding. So let's say you have an object, you wanted to pre-populate this form with some values. So let's say username is Appy, and let's say city is, let's say, Coppell, Coppell. Okay, now let's save it, and then you refresh your form. Let's see, we have some errors. Cannot read property username of undefined. Alrighty, let's take a look at what is going on. Registration form component HTML. ng-model equal to user.username, user.city. Cannot read property username of undefined. Let me see if I saved everything. Why it's undefined? Cannot read property username of undefined. That means it's not able to find the user. But I do have the user defined here. Username and city. Alrighty, let's do one thing. Let's add a question mark here. So what does this question mark basically does is, so if this is undefined, then it will not try to get your username. Okay, if this is undefined, if user is undefined, it will not try to get your city on it. Let's see if that actually helps. Yeah, that takes the errors away, but I'm not getting the data. So that is not good. What did I miss? Let's close this app component HTML. We don't need that. Let's open and close the styles module. Username and city. So this is a JavaScript object. User.username, user.city. Why it's not able to find it? That's an interesting. Let's build that one more time. Let me take a look at my example that I have. ng-model, that looks good. Course name, what? Oh, I put a colon there. Oh, that was a problem. Yeah, that's a typo there. I thought it will give me an error. Yeah, now I think that will work. Let's see if this is finished. Oh, it's still doing chunk optimization. Alright, if you see the forms, the fields are populated with values. Okay, so if you wanted to pre-populate your forms, so you just change your ng-model to your property binding, and then you can see the values inside your page, user.username and user.city. So let's remove those, we don't need them. Okay, so this is pretty good. But if you wanted to, instead of using your R form, but if you wanted to do two-way data binding, you can always do that. It's a mix of your property binding and your event binding. You just have to put. So this is your one-way binding. That means if you it just taking your component value and just populating it. So let's say inside your component, let's print out your user.username, console.log user.username. Okay, now let's go ahead. Yeah, it should be this dot user.username. I always forget that. Okay, let's change this value to, let's say, a pbh. Click on submit. If you see, your object has the new values, but your component state is still the same. Okay, it's not updated because we are not doing a two-way binding. We are doing a one-way binding. You can always set it by taking the username from this object that you already have, right? We can say this dot. We can directly say this dot user dot username equal to rform dot value dot username. Have a typo there. Okay, you're taking the username from your R form and then you're setting it to your component. Okay, now we try to print it out. It's going to print out the same value that you entered because we are setting it. You see, it printed out the new value. Okay, so if you wanted to do two-way binding, it's very simple. When you wanted to do two-way binding, you really don't need your form anymore. You can remove this, correct? You can remove your form. You can just change this to, okay, you have your property binding and your event binding combined together. And then here you don't need to pass your R form, correct? And then you can go here, remove your R form here. We don't need that anymore. And then you can directly print out your this.user.username. So this is your two-way data binding in your AngularJS, where whenever there is a change, it basically takes your component states and bind it to your HTML. And if the HTML changes, it will change your component automatically. Okay, let's try pbh and you click on submit. If you see, my component has an updated state. Okay, that's your two-way data binding that you can perform in your AngularJS programming. Okay, I'm going to switch it back. Let's put these back. Okay, the next thing that we are going to do is, so we are going to add some nested controls. So this is username and city is pretty straightforward. So let's add an address property here. Okay, and then your address property, I'm going to move this city to my address. Okay, city. So let's add one more property, state. Let's say state is Texas. Okay, we have your username, and it has another property which is another object. City couple, state is Texas. Now let's go to your component and let's add. We already have city. Let's add state. So which you can just copy paste this guy, and then let's add state. For equal to state, name equal to state, user dot address dot state, user dot address dot city, correct? But here there is one other thing that you need to understand. Here we have your name here, right? This name is very important. Okay, because if you see, when your ng form, when your Angular is constructing that object that we are printing out, so it's basically creating your username property. It will create your city property and state property. It will not create address dot city, address dot state. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens when we print out that form right now. So let's go here. Let's remove these stuff here. We don't need them anymore right now. Let's create rform.value. Here rform.value. Okay, so if you see we have the values populated. So let's change here. Let's change your copel to, let's say it's Irving. Okay, or Irving. Let's click on submit. If you see we have your object created. If you see your object has city, state and your username. It does not have address. Correct? And these two are at the same level as your username. But we want these two properties to be inside your address. So in order to do that, what we need to do is we need to wrap these two properties that we have your city and state. So this should be state. Inside another div, let's say div, have another div, and then here you do tab, and then here you add ng modal group equal to address. So when you add your ng modal group equal to address, so if you see the name itself says it's grouping, it will take these two properties under the group and then we'll put them inside your address. Okay, now let's run that one more time. Let's change this to Irving. Irving. Click on your submit. If you see we have your object which has your username and you have your address object. So you expand this and you can see your address has two properties, which is your Irving indexes. If you see it looks very similar to your user object. Correct? Very good. And if you see how we are able to bind the data when you have more than one property, you say user.address.city, user.address.state. Okay, understood? Now let's take a look at your, let's add couple more properties to this user. So let's add a checkbox and a radio button. Okay, let's add radio button, let's add gender. Gender, let's say it's male. I'm going to add active equal to true. Okay, because your checkbox basically is true or false, correct? Boolean. And your gender, we can choose from your male or female. Okay, so let's do one thing. So let's create genders. Let's say genders equal to, it's an array. An array contains two properties, female and male, or male and female. Okay, if you see genders is an array, it basically contains two properties. Now we wanted to display these two properties as a radio button inside our form. Let's go to your component. Okay, let's add another div. I'm going to add div dot radio. I want it's going to be a radio button. I'm going to say div dot radio. So that should basically give me a div with the class radio. And then here what I'm going to do is I'm going to add star ng for. By now you should be familiar with it. Let g of genders. Genders is your array. We are iterating over it. So you're not doing anything here. Let's add a label. We wanted to display G for gender, end of label. Okay, and then we have input type equal to radio. Input type equal to radio. And then obviously you're going to have your ng modal. Ng modal equal to user dot gender, right? Because when the form is loaded, we want the gender to be pre-selected to a value. The pre-selected value is defined inside here, which is your male. That means the radio button should have that value. Okay, let's try this one first and then see. Alrighty. So we got M, but we didn't see F, and the radio button is not selected. Let's take a look at it. Name attribute must be set for the form. Okay, the name attribute is missing. Let's set that. Name equal to gender. This name attribute, you see, this is very important. So using this, it is adding this to your object. Okay. That's going to be the key property. Okay, if you see I got male and female, of course it's a little crooked. I think that's fine. But if you see, but it's not pre-selected. The value is not selected. So for your radio buttons, you have to do a little different. So the way you need to do that is you need to bind the value property of your radio button. So value equal to G. This G here that you have here, that's a G here. Okay, when it creates your value property, it's going to say value equal to M for the first radio button and value equal to F for your second radio button. Set the value property of your radio. Okay, now let's see. If you see you have your male is selected, pre-selected. Okay, you can change the value, you can click on submit, and you can see the form is going to have the value change from your male to female. Okay, so that's how you basically define your radio buttons inside a form. Okay, understood? You have your value is very important. We didn't set any for any of other form inputs, but we have to set it for your radio buttons. Otherwise, you will not see the preset value set for your component. And your name attribute is very important as well. Alrighty, let's add checkbox. A div class equal to checkbox. End of div. Checkbox is going to be the same as your this guy right here. So label is going to be active. Input type equal to checkbox. ng modal equal to user.active. Okay, let's remove this guy and see what happens. Name equal to active as well. Name equal to active. ng modal equal to user.active, active and active. Alrighty, let's see. I have my active set to true, correct? So I wanted to see the checkbox with the active set to true. If you see, it is displaying, but it's a little crooked, correct? If you see, the checkbox is selected, correct? You can change, you can remove, you can uncheck it, you can click on submit. You can basically say, if you see, the active was changed to false for your component. Alrighty, I think we can fix that crookedness by, let's see, W3 schools, Bootstrap. Bootstrap forms. Let's figure out. Okay, this is a checkbox that we have here. So input div class equal to checkbox, input type equal to checkbox. So inside the label we have input type equal to checkbox. Let's add that. Okay, just before the label. Let's add Control X to Control V. Let's see how it displays. Okay, if you see, it looks a little better. Alrighty, so that looks good. So I'm not going to worry about the radio buttons. So understood how we can create forms very easily with Angular. Okay, now let's add validations to our forms. This form validation is very important, right? We wanted to make sure that user entered some values. User is missing values. We need to let the user know that, you know what, you have missed a value. You have to go and fix it. Alrighty, let's go for your username. Okay, I want my username to be a required field. So in order for a component, for an input to be required, it's very simple. You need to add a required property. Okay, required equal to true. Or you can do required equal to true, or you can just add required attribute to your input property. The next thing is I wanted to show the user a message. Or let's forget about that. Okay, let's put required and see what happens. Okay, and then I also wanted to prevent the users from submitting the form when there are some validation errors. The way you can do that is, easy way to do is you can disable the button. The way you can do that, you say I wanted to set the disabled property of my button when my form, which is my R form, dot invalid. You remember I showed you some properties there. We have touched, untouched. The same way we have your invalid property. Your invalid will become true if you have some form validation errors. So I'm setting my disabled property of my button if there are some form validation errors that we have. Okay, let's save it. Let's load our form. Alrighty. Okay, we already have your username pre-populated. Let's remove this guy. If you see, when I remove it, my form is going to disable because we have a form validation error. Okay, let's inspect the HTML of this input form. Okay, if you see, your input form basically have your, it also adds certain styles, certain classes to your form. If you see, it added your ng dirty, that means it's no longer, it's changed. I have your ng invalid, ng touched. We touched the form input, and we have your ng invalid also set. Okay, what we can do is we can take this CSS style. Let's take this ng invalid. And then go to your form component. Form component.ts. Let's go to your styles. Let's define styles for it. Set dot ng invalid. I want the background color to be red. Okay, if everything is good, it will add ng valid. If it's ng valid, I want the background color to be green. Instead of adding background color, let's add border color. Border color would be good, I guess. Border color green, border color red. Let's add a border. Okay, let's test it. Yeah, background color was not the right one. If you see, we have your background color added to green. Okay, everything is good. Now let's remove this. If you see, that field is changed to red. It tells me that okay, there is some problem there that I need to fix, but it still doesn't tell me what's the problem. But if you see that the style reflects that okay, there is some problem with it. Okay, so whenever your Angular automatically adds some CSS styles, CSS classes to your inputs, which you can use to style your inputs the way you want. Okay, so if for example, for this input, you can just see what is inside this guy. You see, it has your ng valid. That's why it's appearing in green. Okay, we have ng invalid. That's why it's appearing in red. Okay, let's add some messages, because form messages are very important, so that user knows exactly what is he missing. Okay, and if you see, your button is still disabled. Okay, there is a small case problem there. Let's fix that. Submit. Okay, so here what I'm going to do is, I wanted to display a message right below this input, dev, end of dev. I wanted to display username is a required field. Okay, when user is missing something, I wanted to display username is required field. So if you leave it like this, so it will display every time username is a required field. Okay, now what I wanted to do is, I wanted to add a class. Class is going to be alert, alert danger. These are your bootstrap styles, alert danger. So we have your alert warning, alert info, and so on. Depending upon the type of the alert, you basically style it. So your alert info is going to be green, alert warning is going to be orange, alert danger is going to be red. Okay. And now let's see what happens. If you see, it says username is a required field, but we wanted to display this message only when there is a problem. So what we're going to do is, we are going to say, so here we are going to add a alias variable for your input. I'm going to add uname equal to ngModal. Okay, uname equal to ng modal. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to gain access to that form control that I have. Uname equal to ng modal, and then what I can do is here I can say star ngif if my uname is touched. That means okay, user has touched that field, and uname dot errors dot required. Okay, uname dot errors dot required. Your form control also have a errors object. Okay, if that errors object has a required property set, then it's going to say display username is a required field. Here we need to be a little more careful, because when there are no errors, your required would not be present. Your errors would be null. So that's why here we need to put a question mark there. So if it is defined, then only try to get the required property, or otherwise you don't need to get it. Okay, it says username is a required field. Okay, let's take a look at that now. Okay, we see it's not displaying anything right now. Okay, let's remove it. And if you see, when I move on to the next field, it immediately shows that okay, username is a required field. Okay, so understood how I did this? I created an alias variable for my input. Okay, the alias variable name can be anything. Here I just chosen uname equal to ng modal. You assign your uname to ng modal, or you assign your ng modal to uname, and then you write star ngif. That's your form control. Your control has your touched property and your errors object. So I have your touched uname dot errors dot required. Okay, username is a required field. Okay, now, so this is pretty good. Now you know how to do this for pretty much all the required fields. Okay, now let's add an invalid property. Say your invalid property where, let's say you want, let's add another property called email to your form. Let's go to your registration form component. Let's add email. Let's say username is, it has to be an email. It's not just a regular one. Let's say it's an email. Let's add api.bh@gmail.com. Okay, it has to be an email. Okay, now in order to validate that email, we need to find the regex that we need for your email. Email regex. Let's search for your email regular expression that we can use for your email. Okay, let's open this link, how to validate email in JavaScript. Here you'll see bunch of emails. So let's copy this guy. This is your email regular expression. Let's copy that and then go to your registration form component HTML. Let's add one more property to our input. Where is that? Top one, right? Let's add a property called pattern. Pattern equal to this guy. That's your regular expression pattern. So what your Angular is going to do is it's going to validate whatever the value entered against this pattern. Okay, so this is your regular expression. It's pretty long to explain, but this basically is a pattern check. You wanted to check. There's a set of rules that you employ for your username. For example, you must have done this for your password, right? Password field, whenever you wanted to create a password, you check, okay, it has to be one uppercase, it should have a special symbol, all of that stuff. You define that using your regular expression. Okay, so if your username is not with this particular pattern, you wanted to display an error message. Okay, let's say how we do it. Let's create one more div. Div class alert danger username dot touched, and if username dot errors dot invalid, if invalid property is set to true, the same way your required is set to true, it's going to come inside, right? So if you see, this is your double and, which is your logical double and in your, the same as in your any programming language. Username entered is invalid. Please check your email format. Let's add a message. Okay, if username is touched and username.address.invalid, have a typo there, then it's going to show this message. Okay, let's take a look at that now. So we have everything looks good. Let's remove a few things here. Let's enter api.bh. Alrighty, it didn't work. Let's take a look at it. No, I think it's not errors.invalid, it's uname.invalid. Alrighty, that looks good. Okay, let's remove some of this stuff here. If you see, I got username entered is invalid. Please check your email format. If I start entering the right format, it will go away. gmail.com. You see, as I have put in dot, it knows that that's the right format. Okay, so that's how you validate it. Email format invalid. Okay, understood how we can write our forms. So here we have two divs, but we can actually do this with just one single div. So inside this div, we can add one more div. End of div. And then we can copy this ngIf from here to this guy. Okay, and then we can copy this guy inside this, and then we can remove class equal to alert danger. And then you can indent that well so that we know what is going on. Okay, so we have your alert danger. Inside that you have two divs, so that way you don't have to repeat your style multiple times. Okay, let's see. And here also we have your uname.touch repeated multiple times. Here you can say star ngIf and say uname.touched, and then you can get rid of this uname.touched here, uname.invalid here. Okay, understood? Because if it is touched, it will come inside and then it will evaluate your ngIfs. Okay, you still see the same behavior. You see, I got an error. So as I am entering the values, if you see, you are not getting the error, but you're still getting a red bar. So let's fix that one as well. If uname is touched and uname.invalid is true, then only come inside. Otherwise, don't come inside, please. Alrighty, let's see that. api.bh@gmail.com. Let's enter. Okay, we have an error. Let's enter the correct value. You see, that goes away. Okay, so that's how you define your forms in a template driven approach in your AngularJS. This is your template driven one, where if you see, your Angular will create all your controls automatically. Okay, and then you set it. Okay, and then you capture the values by sending the form object to your component, and then you can access the values in here. Okay, and then you can take these values and then you can pass it to your, if you don't have any requirement to pre-populate it, for example, you don't need this user object at all. Right, this user object is only doing here to pre-populate your form with values, input values. Let's say, for example, you create a login form, you don't pre-populate anything, right? So at that time you'll not have this. You'll just have your handle login, and you get your form. The form is going to have two fields, username and password, and you pass it to your service. Your service can take this data and can send the data to your server for validating it. Okay, understood how we are able to create your template driven forms pretty easily in your AngularJS. Alrighty, let's see if I have missed anything. Two-way binding, nesting form controls, radio button controls, error messages. I think that's pretty much it. I also showed you how to disable your button and your form is invalid. So with this, whatever we have discussed, you should be able to create your course form component with your form and your other form component pretty easily. Alrighty. So I'll show you tomorrow how to create that course form and course form component, because I'm doing the course one, right? I'll create the course form component and you can do the other form component. I'll also apply route guards, so that way when you're trying to navigate away, you're gonna show an error message. Okay. Alrighty. And we'll take a look at how to do the other type of forms tomorrow. The reactive forms, data driven forms. Okie dokie.